Jess, how are you, man?
I'm great. How are you?
We are moving from the beautiful Napa Valley to the beautiful Sierra foothills.
Yeah, Amador County.
So what's it like living where you get nosebleeds?
Oh, I try to avoid nosebleeds. We're about actually, our vineyard runs from about 1650 to 1750 elevation.
Yep.
And we actually, you can't see in this photo in particular, but we have the Sierra Nevada snowcaps in the distance. So I usually can go out and peek and see if it's too windy to go skiing.
I was going to say, how long does it take you to get to the slopes?
About an hour and 15 minutes, depending. Today, they got 7 or 8 inches, so it probably would have taken me an hour, 45 minutes.
Well, thank you for showing up here.
Yeah, right?
I mean, it's been a bad season, you know,
Right.
from the standpoint of water and snow. So,
There's no friends on powder days.
yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
How did you? Now, you didn't start out wanting to be in the wine business. You went and did other things as well before you got in the wine business.
Yeah, actually, the vineyard was purchased by my parents in 2004, and at that time, I was attending school at University of Colorado in Boulder. And unlike Rory, I was doing less reading and more enjoying.
Was there skiing there too?
There was a lot of skiing going on there as well, yeah. But I studied economics, math economics, and I went out and I pursued real estate investment and insurance, and then the last thing I did before I moved back was actually medical software.
Well, that would drive anybody into the wine business.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad to not be doing that anymore, I'll tell you that much. Totally
So
different.
when did you end up coming back to the winery?
So I actually, in 2007 and 2009, while I was in school, I did what my dad would call internships, but it ended up being 10 or so hour days in the vineyards doing pruning throughout the whole summer. And that's where I got my first understanding of the vineyard. And then I moved back full time in 2013. So next month I'm a good 5 years in.
That's great. Well, good to get started when you're young.
Right.
You know, sometimes you'll inevitably get old, but you know, there's a lot of time between now and then. So,
Right.
fantastic. So, do you have any sort of icons in Amador? Because you guys ended up in Amador. Why'd you end up in Amador?
So my parents are from the Bay Area, and they had a lot of interest in the wine industry and used to go up to Sonoma, Napa. But they did a private tasting with Kerner Rombauer and had mentioned to him during that tasting that they were looking at trying to purchase a vineyard they called it semi-retirement. It's no longer that. And Rombauer, if you don't know, has been purchasing grapes from Amador County and El Dorado County for quite a bit of time for their Zinfandels. And he mentioned to them that Amador County was the place to look. And they left, I think, the next weekend or 2 weekends later and drove up and started driving around and actually stumbled across our current vineyard property. And very quickly after that ended up purchasing the property.
So, when you got there, they had already started making wine, and were they getting advice from anybody else up there?
Yeah, so there's Amador County, like Sonoma Napa, has some icons who've been doing it for a very long time. And there's a gentleman by the name of Buck Cobb, who some of you might be familiar with if you know Zinfandel. And he had Carley Winery, which is now the property that's owned by Turley. And Turley has a taste room there. And one of the great things about Amador County is it's a very small community, and Buck used to come over and help really just teach myself and my dad how to properly run the vineyard. And so he would come over and we'd have some questions for him, and we'd be sort of rapid fire asking him a ton of questions. And so he was one, and Dick Cooper was another. They really lent us a lot of advice and insight in terms of how to properly manage the vineyard, how to prune, and really what to expect in terms of full management of our vineyard. The vineyard was established, first vineyard vines were planted late 80s, early 90s. So we did a lot of overhaul in the years 2005 through 2009 in terms of ripping up and planting anew and doing all sorts of that stuff.
So your soils are that typical granitic soil that's up there in Amador?
Yes, granitic soil. So we have, our particular area is actually the Shenandoah Valley, and our vineyard sits in like a bowl, and it's all glacier dug out at the foothills. And so we have really fine granitic soil with a little bit of clay and sand, just generic sand.
Is it relatively deep, or is it thin and shallow?
It's a little bit of both. We have, I don't think we go as deep. Most of our vines are in that 10 to 12 feet max. There are some old vines that are going deeper in our area because sometimes that granitic soil can be very thin once it gets through the clay. But we have, on our property, we've done a lot of excavation and pulled out 700 tons of rock.
I hope you're planning to build something with that.
We built a cave. So my dad's an engineer, and he's always dreamed of having a wine cave, I guess. And they typically, instead of digging a hole and putting a top on, they wanted to do a real one, and they were trying to drill it out. But they got 10 feet in and then had to dynamite blast the rest. So our neighbors hated us for a bit, and it took an extra 3 or 4 months. We pulled 650 tons of large granite rocks out of there.
Wow.
No gold. We were the fools there.
That's economically, damaging.
Right. Well, now it's, now we're at, I think, just from an economic standpoint on that, we are a couple years away, 2, I think, from that project fully paying for itself.
Fantastic.
So one of the things we focus on is sustainability, and that is now, we actually have internet in our cave and electricity for lights, and that's about it.
That's the most important thing.
Yes.
So you grow Zinfandel, obviously, but you also grow Primitivo.
Yes, we do.
Which is the other Zinfandel.
Yes.
Some call it Zin Clone P, but it really is Primitivo. So is there a difference between your Zinfandel and your Primitivo?
We actually, we grow them right next to each other. The Primitivo's at the top of our vineyard, and it is like the name lends itself to the first red grape that we pull out during harvest. There's minor differences in terms of how the plants are looking. Some of the leaves are a little bit different, so it's fun to show the 2 different leaves and how the colors change. So you actually, during the fall, you can stand at the top of the vineyard, and there's a distinct difference in terms of the foliage and the colors. And then we actually end up with a stronger white pepper versus a black pepper coming from the Primitivo on our particular vineyards.
Interesting. So winemaking, how do you approach that? You have evolved from an intern to having your hands in virtually everything.
Yeah. So when your parents own a vineyard and winery, you end up doing everything. And I now manage our wine production. We actually, my mom is our full-time winemaker, and so I'm learning and working directly with her. It was one of those things when I first moved back, it was my dad, Charlie, my mom, Michael, and myself, and then Dewey, who is actually here as our tasting room manager. It was the 4 of us doing all of our production from 2013, 14, 15. Now one of my brothers and another worker helped me out during that. But we actually will pull, we have about 8 different varietals on our vineyard, and we source quite a few other ones. But learning from that, there's nothing more inspiring from the back end once we get to this point than knowing exactly what we did to this wine, when we did it, how we did it, and learning that whole process. It's way more interesting than medical software.
So let's talk about the 2 wines. You've got the Bella Grace Reserve, Amador County, and you have the Estate, Amador County, glasses 3 and 4. One's 2014, one's 2015. You want to talk a little bit about the differences and what's the same?
Yeah, so we have 2 really fun stories on these. The first one is the 2014 Reserve. This is 100% old vine Zinfandel. This isn't grown on our vineyards, but it's grown on a vineyard about 3 miles down the street from us called Crane Sleeper Ranch. If you're here at this event, you know Amador for being sort of the origination of Zinfandel. There's some arguments there, but Crane Sleeper Ranch is a heritage vineyard. It dates back to the late 1800s. The blocks we pull from are 60 years old. They're dry farmed, head pruned, so they meet all the characteristics we're looking for. And what we did in 2014 is, if you guys remember, that's sort of the peak time. That was a great vintage for the wine industry in terms of the drought and the impact it had. And so we had really stressed out vines, and we ended up with, I think it was about half to 2/3 of the yield. And instead of making a lesser known or a standard old vine Zinfandel, we decided to go reserve. So this actually is 50% new French oak. It's a barrel selection from what we had and aged inside of our wine cave. So it's a very fun showing in terms of what we can do with the different grapes out of Amador.
And it's 100% Zinfandel?
It's 100% Zinfandel, yeah. So we used, on that, it's a lot of French oak. We've moved a lot of our Zinfandel to French oak, with the neutral being French and American, and some Hungarian hybrids.
And the second one?
The second one is from our estate. So right below the Primitivo, we actually have 4 different blocks of Zinfandel. We, in 2009 now, ripped out some older non-producing vines that just really weren't doing well and planted 2 new clones in there. So we have 4 distinct clones, 8 to 16 years old. And this is a blend of those 4. From our vineyard, we can produce about 1,400 cases of Zinfandel. This is the 2015 Estate Zin, which is a barrel selection. We produced only about 300 cases of this. So this ended up being about 30% new French oak. And we're really zoning in, and it's fun. We have 100 glasses on the table, trying all the different blends from the different barrels. And so that's a different play. You'll see a slight difference in terms of the fruit characteristics between those two. And we're showing you a little bit younger wine right after an old vine.
So stylistically, you're clearly not going after those 1970s Amador County wines, which were like 16% alcohol and like 4 grams residual sugar and about enough tannin to rip your mouth out if it hadn't been for the sugar. Clearly, what's your vision for Amador Zin?
So I think the first wine you tried is actually 14.7%, but the second wine, the 2015, is 14.2%. And one of the hats I wear is a salesperson, so I think what we're trying to do here is make a wine that you guys want to drink a lot of. And as easy as
got to pay for those caves, guys.
Yeah,
Drink
got to
up.
pay for all this stuff. So, but I think it's very important to us and our growers in Amador to see the sort of how Zinfandel can evolve. You'll find in Amador there are a lot of those 15, 16% sort of mouth puckers, and we're sort of, these 2 wines are really today's wine. These are our take on it. It's blending the old sort of farming styles with a new take on making the wines.
Fabulous.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jess. Really appreciate your
Joel.
Amador wines and your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.